He only said 4 words, "I want a divorce." Audrey Sinclair didn't cry. Not right away. She stood in the kitchen of the house they'd bought together 7 years ago. The one with the warped floorboard by the back door that she kept meaning to fix. The one with the window above the sink that let in just enough light on winter mornings to make the whole room feel salvageable. And she held a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, and she looked at her husband, and she said nothing. Nathan Sinclair set his keys on the counter the way he always did, deliberately, like a man who had rehearsed this moment many times in the privacy of his own head. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he said. "It's not a decision I made lightly." Audrey thought about how people always say that. It's not a decision I made lightly. As though the gravity of a decision excused the wound of it. As though suffering through the choice erased the suffering it caused. She set the mug down. "Is there someone else?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Her name was Petra. Audrey would find this out 3 days later through a mutual friend who couldn't quite meet her eyes when she said it. Petra Langford, 28 years old. Nathan's junior associate at the firm. The kind of woman who laughed easily and wore her ambition like perfume. Present everywhere, overwhelming up close. Audrey was 36. She had spent the last 7 years building a life around a man who had been quietly building a different one. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday. Her lawyer, a small, precise woman named Harriet, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had seen, she said, every version of this story, walked Audrey through each page with careful efficiency. "Standard division of assets," Harriet said. "He's not contesting the property. The Westmount apartment goes to you. The cottage in Prince Edward County goes to him." Audrey initialed where she was told. She signed where the tabs indicated. Her hand was steady. That surprised her. What she did not notice, what Harriet did not flag, because it had been buried on page 11, beneath a clause about shared investment accounts, formatted in the same font and size as everything around it, was a single paragraph that waived Audrey's right to any future claim against Nathan's family trust. A trust that, at the time, held very little. A trust that, 14 months later, would be worth something else entirely. She found out about the trust on a Wednesday morning in February, standing in her kitchen in her socks, reading a news alert on her phone. Sinclair Group acquires Meridian Capital in $2.3 billion deal. The photo showed Nathan shaking hands with someone in a boardroom. He looked the same. He always looked the same. By then, Audrey was 8 months pregnant. She hadn't known she was pregnant when she signed the papers. She had found out 6 weeks later, alone in a pharmacy bathroom on St. Catherine Street, staring at a test she'd bought out of a kind of procedural desperation. Something was wrong. She'd been tired and nauseous for weeks. She thought it was grief. She thought it was the particular exhaustion of becoming a person you didn't recognize. She had been wrong about that. Or rather, she had been right, but for the wrong reasons. The pregnancy was not something she had planned. It was not something Nathan knew about. She thought about telling him in those first stunned days, and then she thought about Petra, and she thought about the way he had said, "It's not a decision I made lightly," and she decided that some things were hers alone to carry. She called her sister instead. Louisa lived in Kelowna, ran a small pottery studio, and had never particularly liked Nathan. She flew to Montreal the next morning without being asked. "Okay," Louisa said when Audrey told her. "Just that. Okay." Then she made eggs and they sat at the kitchen table and they didn't talk about Nathan at all. That was the beginning of what Audrey would later think of as the quiet year. Not quiet because nothing happened. Everything happened. But quiet in the sense that she stopped performing. She stopped being the version of herself that had learned to orbit Nathan's life. She lived in the Westmount apartment alone. She taught her design courses at Concordia 3 days a week. She let Louisa call every evening and tell her about difficult customers and the particular challenges of glazing stoneware in dry weather. She ate badly and then she ate well. She cried at unexpected things. A song in a grocery store, a particular quality of afternoon light, and felt no shame about it. The baby came on a Sunday, 6 weeks early, which nobody had anticipated. Audrey's water broke while she was sitting at her desk grading student portfolio submissions. She called Louisa, who was 6 provinces away. She called a cab. At the hospital, in the strange bright calm of a delivery room, she gave birth to twins. 2 girls. The doctor placed them on her chest, small, red-faced, impossibly serious, and Audrey held them and felt something she did not have a word for. Not joy, exactly, not relief, something older than both, something that had been waiting in her without her knowledge. She named them Marin and Ivy. She did not call Nathan. She had thought, in the abstract, that she might. She had told herself she would think about it when the time came. But when the time came, she was holding two people who had not existed yesterday, and the idea of introducing them to a man who had chosen Petra Langford over their mother felt like a wrong she was not willing to do to them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The hospital social worker came to see her on the second day. A kind man with a beard and careful eyes, who asked her gently about her support system, her housing, her plans. "I have a sister," Audrey said. "She's coming tomorrow." Louisa arrived with 2 car seats, a week's worth of food in a cooler, and the particular competence of a woman who had already decided that she was staying until further notice. She slept on the couch. She woke up for the 3 a.m. feeding without being asked. She said nothing about Nathan, and Audrey did not bring him up, and for a while they lived in that suspension together, the two of them and the 2 small urgent mysteries Audrey had produced. It was Louisa who first told her about the lawsuit. It was a month after the twins came home. Audrey was nursing Ivy on the couch, Marin asleep in the bassinet across the room, and Louisa sat down beside her with her phone turned outward. "I think you need to see this." The article was from a Montreal business publication. The headline read, "Sinclair Group faces internal fraud investigation. Former CFO named in scheme." The piece described a complex series of financial transactions, shadow accounts, falsified reporting, money redirected from client holdings, that had been traced back to someone inside the company. There was a name Audrey didn't recognize, Oliver Fenn, Nathan's CFO of 4 years. According to the article, investigators believed the scheme had been running since before Nathan's acquisition of Meridian Capital. There were suggestions, carefully worded, that the fraud may have been used to inflate the company's apparent assets ahead of the deal. Audrey read it twice. Then she said, "He didn't know." Louisa looked at her. "Nathan didn't know," Audrey said. "Oliver did this. Nathan trusted him completely. I remember. He used to say Oliver was the only person at the firm who actually understood what they were building." She felt something shift in her that she didn't want to examine too closely. Not sympathy, or not only that. Something more complicated. The knowledge that a person can be the villain of your story and the victim of someone else's simultaneously, and that neither truth cancels the other. What she did not know, what she would learn only later, in a conversation that changed the shape of everything, was that Oliver Fenn had not acted alone. He had been given access to Nathan's accounts by someone who had provided his credentials, and that someone had done it deliberately, and that the trail, when fully investigated, would lead somewhere entirely unexpected. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. Audrey was putting Marin to sleep, walking slow circles in the dim bedroom, when her phone buzzed on the dresser. An unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. The message, when she listened to it, was from a man who introduced himself as Colin Warwick, and who said he was a private investigator, and who said he needed to speak with her about her former husband's company, and about a document that had been filed with her divorce settlement. She called him back the next morning. Colin Warwick was not what she had expected. He was in his early 50s, soft-spoken, with the methodical quality of someone who had spent decades learning to be patient with the truth. He came to her apartment on a Thursday with a folder, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table, and he said, without preamble, "Miss Audrey, the clause in your divorce settlement, page 11, the family trust waiver. Are you aware that language was inserted after your lawyer reviewed the final draft?" She was not aware of that. It was added in the 24 hours between Harriet's sign-off and the document being sent to you. We have version history from the firm's document management system. The clause did not appear in the draft your lawyer approved. Audrey sat with this. "Who added it?" she asked. Colin opened his folder. Oliver Fenn had access to the system. But he wasn't acting for himself. He was acting for someone who wanted to ensure that you, specifically, would have no claim on Nathan's assets in the event the company's value increased significantly. "Petra," Audrey said. Colin looked at her steadily. She was aware of the acquisition timeline before it was public. She had reason to believe the trust would become very valuable, and she had access to Nathan's professional network through her position at the firm. Audrey thought about the woman she had never met. The woman whose name she had learned through a mutual friend who couldn't meet her eyes. She thought about how Petra had spent the months before the divorce, not just taking a husband, but dismantling a settlement, engineering a future, making sure that when Nathan's fortunes rose, Audrey would have no legal foothold anywhere near them. She thought of everything, Audrey said. There was something almost like admiration in it, involuntary and immediately repulsive. She didn't think of the document management system, Colin said. Harriet reviewed the evidence over the weekend and called Audrey on Monday morning, her voice careful and precise. "This constitutes fraud on the settlement process," she said. "The clause is almost certainly voidable. More importantly, the original trust waiver being invalidated means you may have a legitimate claim to asset division that was never properly adjudicated. What does that mean practically? It means the divorce settlement may need to be reopened, and it means Nathan needs to know." There was a silence. "Audrey," Harriet said, more gently. "He also doesn't know about the twins." She had not thought about this moment, or rather she had been actively not thinking about it. Holding it at a distance, the way you hold something hot, knowing that when you finally have to touch it, it will hurt. But she was also by now a different person than the woman who had signed those papers. She had survived a year she hadn't known she could survive. She had grown 2 people inside her body and brought them into the world alone, and fed them and held them at 3 a.m., and felt them settle into sleep against her shoulder. And she had discovered, in all of that, a version of herself she hadn't known existed. Someone harder and quieter and more certain than the woman who had stood in the kitchen, holding a cold mug of tea. She called Nathan on a Wednesday. She had not spoken to him since the day the divorce was finalized. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was the same. "Audrey, I need to tell you something," she said. "2 things. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." She told him about the twins first. She heard the silence on his end, a long, strange silence that she couldn't quite read. Then she told him about the document, and Oliver Fenn and Petra, and the clause on page 11. When she was done, there was more silence. And then Nathan said, in a voice she didn't recognize, "She told me you'd agreed to the trust waiver. She said your lawyer had flagged it and you'd signed off." "No," Audrey said. "She was in the room when I signed. She was the one who handed me the pen." Audrey closed her eyes. The fraud investigation into Oliver Fenn expanded to include Petra Langford within 6 weeks of that call. The charges were significant: fraudulent manipulation of a legal document, breach of fiduciary duty in her role at the firm, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The Sinclair Group's legal team moved swiftly. Nathan cooperated with investigators completely. Petra, it turned out, had also been the one to provide Oliver with Nathan's credentials. The same credentials used to inflate the company's accounts ahead of the Meridian deal. She had wanted the acquisition to close. She had wanted the trust to accrue. She had wanted Audrey permanently out of the picture. She had built a careful architecture of damage, and she had done it so quietly, from so close, that no one had thought to look. The investigation concluded in autumn. By then, Maren and Ivy were 7 months old and had opinions about things, about which position they preferred to sleep in, about the particular stuffed animal that Louisa had brought from Kelowna, about the sound of rain against the apartment windows, which made Maren furious and seemed to calm Ivy into a kind of meditative contentment. Audrey had started working again. A mid-sized architecture firm in Montreal's Old Port had offered her a senior design role. Her portfolio had apparently been circulating among people she hadn't known were paying attention. She had taken the position. She wore the twins in carriers and answered emails during nap times and felt not happy exactly, but directed, pointed toward something. Nathan filed for access. Not custody. He didn't contest primary care. He came to Harriet's office and sat across from Audrey and said that he understood this was his fault, all of it, and that he didn't expect forgiveness, and that he only wanted to be part of their lives if that was something Audrey could eventually allow. She looked at him for a long time, the man she had loved. The man who had said, "I want a divorce," in her kitchen and put his keys on the counter, like a period at the end of a sentence. The man who had, she now understood, also been deceived. Not in the same way she had, not with the same injury, but deceived nonetheless. "They deserve to know their father," she said. "That has nothing to do with what I think of you." He nodded. His jaw was tight. "But you don't come to my apartment," she said, "and you don't bring her, and we do this through Harriet until I decide otherwise." "Okay," he said. Harriet renegotiated the settlement in November. The trust waiver was voided. The original asset division was reopened. Audrey's lawyers identified what she was owed under the original terms, not what Nathan had built with Meridian, which was his, but what had existed before the divorce, which was theirs. The number was not a fortune. It was enough. It was what she had been entitled to all along. She moved to a larger apartment that winter, in a quiet part of the plateau with high ceilings and original hardwood and a window in the girls' room that caught the afternoon light in a particular way. She hung mobiles above the cribs. She painted the kitchen yellow, slowly, over 3 weekends, Louisa on the other end of the phone offering commentary from Kelowna. She bought a new kettle and made tea in the evenings, and let it cool sometimes, without finishing it. The old habit, and felt something about it that was not grief and not nostalgia, but something that recognized both. She was not the woman who had stood in that kitchen a year ago. She was not the woman who had signed her name on a document she hadn't fully read. She was not the woman who had let herself become small in the orbit of someone else. She was Maren and Ivy's mother. She was a senior designer at a firm that respected her. She was someone who had learned, in the longest and quietest year of her life, that survival was not a passive thing, that you had to choose it every day, in small, unspectacular ways. There was a man. She would tell Louisa about him eventually. In the embarrassed and hopeful way she told Louisa about most things. His name was James Thayer. He was a structural engineer at a firm 2 floors above hers, and he had held the elevator door for her on a Tuesday in January, and they had talked about a building they both knew, and he had asked if she wanted to get coffee, and she had said yes before she'd finished thinking about it. He made her laugh. That was, she'd learned, not a small thing. She didn't know what it would become. She let herself not know. She let herself hold it loosely, the possibility of it. The way you hold something you've been burned before and are choosing carefully to reach for again. Maren had begun to grab at things. Her sister's foot, the edge of a blanket, Audrey's hair when she leaned in close to kiss her forehead. She held on with a grip that was, for someone that small, surprisingly determined. Audrey thought about this more than once. The way an 8-month-old simply decided what she wanted and reached for it without apology, without hesitation, without the long interior negotiation that adults mistake for wisdom. She thought, I am trying to learn that. She was trying. Outside, the Montreal winter was doing what it always did, pressing in, gray and unrelenting, the kind of cold that clarifies things. She had lived here her whole adult life. She knew how to dress for it. She knew that under all that ice, stubbornly, things were already beginning. She picked up Ivy, who was making the face she made before deciding to either laugh or cry. The same face, Louisa said, that Audrey used to make as a child, which Audrey found both impossible and entirely believable, and she held her daughter against her chest and stood at the window and looked out at the city. Her city. Still.